Papa, why do we celebrate the 4th of July? What's the big deal with all the fireworks? The question came out of the blue on the way back from a road trip with my granddaughters. I'm not sure what prompted it. I tried my best to explain the signing of the Declaration of Independence and what that meant for those 13 colonies and their relationship with England. I'm not sure how much that 8-year-old soaked in. We'll see. But it did get me thinking. When was the last time I looked at the Declaration of Independence? I couldn't remember. I do remember certain parts of it. They're indelibly etched in my mind from history class in high school. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Powerful words. The words of the Declaration of Independence changed not only the course of this nation, but affected nations across the globe for decades, and one may even argue centuries after the fact. Another such landmark document in the life of the known world was Paul's letter to the Romans. Unlike all of the rest of Paul's letters that were written to churches that he had founded or visited and was now addressing a particular issue facing that church, Paul's letter to the Romans was a letter addressed to a church in Rome that he had never visited. He was hoping to. And so it was, in a sense, a letter of introduction. This is who I am. This is what I teach. This is what I believe to be the truth of the ministry, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus the Christ. As such, it becomes perhaps the clearest understanding of Paul's teachings, a compendium, if you would. It is a very interesting letter and should be hauled out periodically to be perused. It's getting pressed these days because those early chapters are being used to once again divide who's in and who's out. But rather than dividing, Paul is drawing an interesting noose around all of our necks, to the point that by the time we reach chapter 3, we begin to recognize that, well, we don't sit too well before God. In fact, if we're honest with ourselves, if we've been listening carefully to Paul, we've blown it. And Paul makes it clear. We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Can't get much clearer than that. Before God, we stand as equals, screwed, at least under the law. And then Paul goes on to say, so now let me tell you about God's grace. And what Paul reveals then is that we stand before God justified. We have any right before God, not on our own, but on God's mercy and grace. In that event on the hillside outside the garbage dump of Jerusalem, when Jesus hung on the cross, when God gave God's self up for us, it was finished. It was done. Our relationship with God was sealed. we have been made right with God, not by anything that we have done or left undone, but by God's grace. Because God loves us so much and recognizes our inability to get it right, God got it right for us and made it right once and for all. We have been set free from guilt and grave by God's grace. The question for us then is, what do we do with this freedom? How do we live together? In the rest of Paul's letter to the Romans, he gives us some ideas about what it means to live in community. But it becomes a plaguing question for us as church. What do we do now that we've been set free? When God's made it right? What do we do when we can't do anything to change that relationship? The church has struggled with that. We keep wanting to put buts in there. At various times in the church's history, it's been stronger than others. There's got to be something we do. Well, we certainly can screw it up, can't we? Luther and others would say, this is God's work, not ours. Well, we can add to it. We can cooperate with it. We can work out our own salvation. We can make it better, can't we? How do we improve on what God has done? Well, there are certainly people that are outside of God's grace, aren't there? We have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. I'm not so sure. It's a plaguing question for us as church, and we continue to wrestle with it. Freedom is hard. How do we live in the freedom that God has given to us? Not just in Romans. But what about that crazy line from the Declaration of Independence? You know, the one, all men are created equal. What does that mean? It's meant various things in the dark history since 1776. Does all men include just white males who happen to own land? Or is it truly all men? Does it include the indigenous peoples of this land? There was a time it didn't. Does it include blacks? Our history is ugly on that one. Does it include women? Now, there's an interesting one. Does it include queers? Today's hot topic. What does it mean for us as a nation to be set free? And how does our being set free by God relate? If we have been set absolutely free by the grace of God, who are we to draw the lines? What does it mean for us to be free? A good question to ponder this 4th of July.